with no Democrat support. We couldn't quite get there. We're just a very small number of votes short in terms of getting our bill passed.
President Donald Trump reacting today after the Republican majority Congress didn't even vote on a bill to repeal and replace Obamacare. A brutal Friday defeat at the end of a lousy presidential week. On Monday, the head of the FBI dropped a public bombshell that the Trump campaign is under investigation in connection with Russia's meddling in the U.S. election. For some perspective, I'm joined by Stuart Streichler. He is an expert in law and politics at the University of Washington in Seattle. Professor Streichler, let's start with health care. The president withdrew the health care bill, knowing it would come up short on votes. This was a Republican bill supported by a Republican president while the Republicans control Congress. What happened?
Well, what you've got, I'm reminded of a remark President Trump made some time ago before the governors where he said, "Who knew that health care legislation was so complicated?" Well, the Democrats know before, and a lot of Republicans did too. There's many moving parts to this, and what really happened was he can't bridge the difference between some moderate Republicans who don't want to lose Medicaid and scale that back so much, and the Freedom Caucus, very conservative Republican congresspersons who are opposed to any kind of continuation of the Affordable Care Act, the Obamacare, and they want to repeal it completely. So they can't bridge that gap. They didn't have enough votes. They didn't really work with the Democrats to try to come up with any alternative either.
Well, it seems like the American president is going to be moving on to tax reform specifically, but what impact could this loss have on Donald Trump's presidency?
It might suggest some weakness in the legislative liaison with the legislative branch going forward. So if I was on President Trump's team, I would not have wanted to start off with a major loss and then go on to tax reform. It'll be interesting to see how this goes from here.
Okay, I'd like to shift gears to another potential scandal for the Trump administration. The question in the air, hanging in the air, of whether members of the Trump campaign coordinated with someone inside Russia to influence the American election. The FBI confirmed earlier this week there is an investigation underway. How serious could this get?
This could get very serious, I think. It was interesting how Director Comey, the FBI director, had laid out the subject of the investigation. It wasn't just that the Russians were interfering with the election and that was a subject of investigation. They were looking at links between the Trump campaign and the Russian government. And then further, just like you said, whether there was coordination. I don't think he would have said that if there wasn't some evidence that they had in front of them that they were looking at. And this could get very serious. It's at least going to be a scandal hanging over the White House, however it goes. And I think there's going to be calls for more evidence to become public and, more inquiries besides just the House Intelligence Committee and the Senate Intelligence Committee.
Do you think there will be an independent commission, as some have called for, or should be?
I think, there's two other routes besides Congress, and one route would be an independent commission, like the 9/11 Commission. You need the president or Congress to set that up, or both of them together, and I don't think they're going to move in that direction. The other point would be a special prosecutor, because right now, the prosecutors who would make a decision on whether to prosecute when the FBI turns over evidence to them are all answerable to President Trump. In fact, the FBI director could be fired by President Trump. So a special prosecutor would be considered independent. And that goes back to, the example that's famous for us in the United States would be the special prosecutor in the Watergate scandal. And then there were independent counsels after that. The most famous might be Ken Starr investigating President Clinton.
Well, at the end of the day, if the president or people close to the president are found guilty of these kinds of charges, what happens then?
Well, if there's a question of whether the president himself was involved in colluding with Russian government and there may be criminal offenses that he committed, what happens there is you have to have an impeachment first. You can't put the president in a criminal process without an impeachment. The impeachment would be based on whether he committed high crimes and misdemeanors. It would go to the House of Representatives, and then it would shift over to the Senate for a trial. And then if they convicted, the president would be removed from office. We've never had that in American history. You know, there's that old Watergate question. What did the president know and when did he know it? And we haven't got there yet, but you remember that Watergate took a couple years before, from the Watergate break-in until President Nixon resigned.
All right, Stuart Streichler, thank you for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.